Hey everybody, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And yesterday I said we were going to pick up right where we left off with this question about the abomination that leads to desolation in, well, not in one particular chapter of Daniel, but scattered all over the book of Daniel. And as we were talking about yesterday, Daniel deals with this theme of profaning the temple in three different chronological ways. Daniel looks back on a way that the temple was profaned when Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem in, I think they say 586. There's some debate about that date now. Daniel also talks about the continuation of that profaning of the temple under Nebuchadnezzar's son Belshazzar in Daniel's own lifetime. And then Daniel looks forward in a prophecy in chapter 9 to some future profaning of the temple with specific language saying that there will be an abomination that causes desolation. And that specific language is latched onto by Jesus in Matthew chapter 24 in the Olivet Discourse. So what we're working on right now is trying to make the connection between the two. I realized what just happened. I said we were going to pick up right where we left off. And then for those of you who are binging this thing and catching up after the fact, you're like, that was a minute. That's a minute of my time where we did not pick up right where we left off. But for those of you who are listening to this in real time, and yesterday was like 24 hours ago, right now you're like, you know what? I like you, Matt Whitman. I like you because you helped me get right back into it. So I remember what's going on. It's a fine line to walk, my friends. And whether you are caught up or catching up, I'm grateful you're here and infinitely thankful for your patience with my resets. All that said then, who historically would the Jews have imagined that Daniel was talking about in Daniel chapter 9 when it comes to this abomination that's supposed to happen? Well, probably the most popular opinion at the time of Jesus would be that that abomination that led to desolation happened under Antiochus Epiphanes toward the end of the era of Greek rule before the Maccabean revolt that led to the Hasmonean dynasty and the establishment of a short-lived Jewish kingdom in the 2nd century BC. You got this moment after the Ptolemid Empire got replaced by the Seleucid Empire, both Greek empires. But after the Seleucids took over, they were a lot more heavy-handed and forceful in insisting that their Greek ways dominate culture in Jerusalem and Judea. And eventually that insistence encroached into making big public symbolic gestures that were meant to point out the imagined superiority of the Greek cultural and religious assumptions, and that included, supposedly setting up idols to Zeus and some really screwed up stuff that happened in the temple. And this stuff, as you and I have talked about, got so out of hand under Antiochus Epiphanes and the Seleucid rulers that probably most Jews would have said, like, hey, this question is pretty easy as to what Daniel was talking about with the abomination that leads to desolation. Like, did you hear what happened to our temple? Like, it was those Greek guys. They were awful. That's why we had to have a war and throw them off. And it's why we can't wait to get back to having our own kingdom again. And it's why when it comes to the Romans hanging around here, like, they built a barracks right next to our temple. Like, we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. They're going to pull an Antiochus Epiphanes on us any minute. They're going to try to assert Roman cultural superiority and idolatry on us any minute. And we just simply cannot abide that because we already went through that once, and the prophecy of when that was supposed to happen has already been fulfilled. Now, there's a series of books. We've talked about them before. If you are a Protestant, you probably call them the Apocrypha. If you are Orthodox or Catholic, though you would not agree with each other on exactly what books and chapters go in your version of the Deuterocanon, both of those different expressions of Christianity have sort of their own version that, especially as we moved on into the Middle Ages, you would say, yeah, this is maybe not quite on the same level as the rest of the Old Testament, but it's still regarded as scripture. For me, just in the interest of full disclosure, I view these books between the Testaments as being very valuable, as being reflective of things that probably God did and that happened, but not as being inspired in the same way that the rest of the Bible has historically been held out as being inspired. If you see that differently than me, I think we can get along great and both be Christians, no problem. But that's been spoken to now. So one of these such books is 2nd Maccabees. And in chapter 6 of 2nd Maccabees, there is an account from this historical extra-biblical writing that speaks to what went down when Antiochus Epiphanes, the Seleucids, the Greeks, that is, started getting way over the top in terms of what they were doing to profane the temple. And it is a little bit reminiscent of some of the stuff that Nebuchadnezzar pulled the last time that the temple was publicly profaned. It goes like this. 2 Maccabees, it's organized into chapters and verses 6:1. It says, "Not long after that, the king sent an elderly Athenian to force the Jews to abandon their religion and the customs of their ancestors. He was also to defile their temple by dedicating it to the Olympian god Zeus. The temple on Mount Gerizim was to be officially named the Temple of Zeus, the god of hospitality, as the people who lived there had requested." So there's a little bit of a dig at the Samaritans right there. "The oppression was harsh and almost intolerable. Gentiles filled the temple with drinking parties and all sorts of immorality. They even had, hey, if you got kids, you might want to just plug their ears for a second. You got that? I don't want to make you have conversations you're not ready to have with your kids. You got it? Okay, the mildly offensive warning, 3, 2, 1, there we go. It goes on to say here in 2 Maccabees, they even had intercourse with prostitutes there. Forbidden objects were brought into the temple, and the altar was covered with detestable sacrifices prohibited by our law. So unclean things were sacrificed there. It was impossible to observe the Sabbath, to celebrate any of the traditional festivals, or even so much as to admit to being a Jew. Each month, when the king's birthday was celebrated, the Jews were compelled by brute force to eat the intestines of sacrificial animals. Then, during the festival in honor of the wine god Dionysus, they were required to wear ivy wreaths on their heads and march in procession. On the advice of Ptolemy, the neighboring Greek cities were also instructed to require Jews to eat the sacrifices. They were told to put to death every Jew who refused to adopt the Greek way of life. It was easy to see that hard times were ahead. For example, 2 women were arrested for having their babies circumcised. They were paraded around the city with their babies hung from their breasts. Then they were thrown down from the city wall. On another occasion, Philip was told that some Jews had gathered in a nearby cave to observe the Sabbath in secret. Philip attacked and burned them all alive. They had such respect for the Sabbath that they would not fight to defend themselves. And then I'll read this last little bit as well here. It says, "I beg you not to become discouraged as you read about the terrible things that happened. Consider that this was the Lord's way of punishing his people, not of destroying them." And I think that last little bit is an interesting tag because it is reflective of that narrative arc of the whole Old Testament, born out of that Mosaic covenant of, I'm going to be your God, you're going to be my people. If you obey me, everybody's going to know I'm the one true God because I'll bless you. If you disobey me, everybody's going to know I'm the one true God because I'll punish you. I just want to roll and roll and roll on this, and the reality is we have a format and we're going to stick to it. So I'm hitting pause there, and we're picking up where we left off tomorrow so we can treat this the right way and process through it properly. As we briefly put our conversation on hold until tomorrow, let me say again, prophecy can be really intimidating as a genre when you're encountering it throughout the Bible, but it's the kind of thing that is designed to make a ton of sense looking backwards, even if it doesn't make a ton of sense or full sense looking forward. That's the way the genre works. It's okay. It can be weird and frustrating when we really try to make every single dot connect and they don't all neatly connect to one thing. Please don't feel that pressure with me. Like, if that's what you want to do and that's how you want to work on the Bible, that's awesome. That's cool. But the pace and the approach that we're taking here is to try to just understand the big flow of thought and accept with humility that we might not be able to cram this all into a neat formula that decodes in advance all of history. I am at peace with that tension. You don't have to be at peace with that tension, but I want to try to take the pressure off where I can, and I also want to disclose where I'm coming from. So we're going to hit pause there and keep working through this question of the abomination that causes desolation, what on earth that means, what does Daniel have to do with it, and how does the phrase "let the reader understand" factor into all of that. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. I like you. Thank you for doing this. Let's do this again soon.